Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 27 of my Pro Tools video tutorial series. Before I get into the video today, if I haven't said this already, pretty much all of the videos in my Pro Tools 11 tutorial series will work in Pro Tools 10 as well as Pro Tools 12, hence why I haven't upgraded to 12 yet. Today I'm going to show you guys how to work with MIDI tracks along with the XPand 2 instrument, which is essentially Pro Tools' flagship sample-based synthesizer. I'll also give you guys a basic explanation of using MIDI channels in Pro Tools. So to start, I'm going to create 4 new MIDI tracks and 1 stereo instrument track. Just to recap the difference between MIDI tracks and instrument tracks, MIDI tracks can input a MIDI signal and output a MIDI signal, which is essentially just digital information, but not waveform or audio information. An instrument track can input MIDI data or MIDI events and output an audio signal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to use these 4 MIDI tracks to send 4 different channels of separate MIDI events to 1 instrument track with XPand loaded on it. Once we create our 4 MIDI tracks and instrument track, we can go down to the instrument track and we can load up the XPand instrument under multi-channel plugin, instrument, and then XPand 2 in stereo. One thing you'll immediately notice about XPand is that there are 4 instrument channels labeled A, B, C, and D that you can assign with a MIDI channel number 1, 2, 3, or 4. A MIDI channel is a pathway through which MIDI signal can travel. The only thing that's weird about MIDI channels is it's actually a serial pathway. Unlike an audio bus pathway that's actually parallel, MIDI pathways are actually serial. So each message you send is tagged with one of 16 channels. In our case with the XPand, only 4 of those channels are actually used. The 16 channel limit for MIDI generally applies more to hardware instruments than it does software instruments. So in most cases, you're not just going to be limited to just, say, 16 instrument tracks. You can actually go beyond that. Eventually, we will talk about using hardware instruments in Pro Tools, but that's a whole other topic in itself. So for this instrument, we're going to choose the Sound Tracker preset under the multi-timbral folder. The multi-timbral instruments tend to have multi-channel layered sounds, so they're optimized for this sort of thing. But depending on what preset you choose, you may or may not get multiple channels of information to work with. So I'll arm the instrument track and I'll play a few notes on my MIDI keyboard and we'll see what happens. So it sounds like we're just getting drums, the very top channel. Let's try setting all 4 voices to channel 1 and we should get all 4 voices at the same time. Alright, so it sounds like we're hearing all 4 channels, although the drums were a little faint that time. We may need to just mix them differently later. So what we're going to do is we're going to change these 4 voices to 4 different channels so we can play in 4 different sets of MIDI information. So we're going to set these to 1, 2, 3, and 4 sequentially. So we want each of the 4 MIDI tracks to represent one of the 4 MIDI channels or MIDI voices in the XPand. So I'm just going to go ahead and name each of our MIDI tracks to the corresponding voice in the XPand. So we've got our drum loop, the trans pad, we have the synth bass, which is, we're going to turn into an arpeggiated bass. And then the 4th channel is a hard lead, or a hard monophonic lead. We're going to go over to the synth bass channel and turn on the arpeggiation button so that's arpeggiated. And we're going to click the on button to turn the arpeggiator on. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have each of our MIDI tracks output their MIDI signal to a specific MIDI channel in the XPand. So we want each of our 4 MIDI channels to output to channels 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the XPand. This is a way for us to separate the musical ideas in each of our 4 MIDI tracks so that each of the 4 voices in the XPand play different things. So we're going to route the drum loop to channel 1 in the XPand. We're going to route the trans pad to channel 2. We're going to route the arpeggiated bass to channel 3, and then the hard lead to channel 4. So everything matches up with channels 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the XPand. So now instead of arming the XPand and hearing all 4 voices at the same time, we should be able to separate those voices with our MIDI channels. So there's the drums. Let's try the trance pad. Let's try our arpeggiated bass. And lastly, our hard monophonic lead. All right, so everything works individually now. Let me just adjust the levels of each voice just to my taste here. I'm going to pull the drums up a bit as well because they were kind of quiet. Let's close out the XPand. I'm going to go up to Track, Create Click Track, and I'm going to use this just to stay in time. And I'm going to compose a little idea here using each of the 4 voices separately. I'm also going to change the tempo from 120 to 128, just speed it up a little bit. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to start with the drum loop, and I'm just going to play in a musical idea, starting with the drum loop and moving down my 4 MIDI tracks here. The drums are pretty easy here because all I'm doing is holding a couple keys to trigger a drum loop to play. So here we go. All right, so I'm going to use the selector tool to open this up in the MIDI editor. I'm going to hit Option 0 to open this up in the event operations window, and we are going to quantize both the note on and the note off values to a whole note. This will make our drum loop exactly 4 bars long, so there's no gaps. And we'll move down to the next instrument, the trance pad, and we'll play some chords on top of our drum loop. So here we go. All right, that sounded cool, but it was kind of quiet. First let me quantize this first to a whole note. And then what I'll do is I'll go into the XPand instrument and I will play with the levels a bit just to get that sounding okay. Yeah, that sounds a lot better. I can hear that trance pad a lot better and the drums aren't too loud. So let's move on to the bass. I left those gaps in the bass on purpose just to make it easier for me to move my hands to the next chord, but if I quantize that to a whole note, it will correct that issue anyway. All right, before we move down to the hard lead, I'm going to open the XPand again, just play with a few levels here. This is a cool thing about this. You can still adjust the levels of all 4 instruments individually. All right, so let's play with the monophonic lead and create a cool little melodic idea. All right, so after doing some quantizing and editing on the hard monophonic lead, this is what we end up with. Obviously, our lead idea is a bit longer, twice the length of the other ideas that I played in. So using the selector tool and grid mode, and I'm going to set the grid to a whole note. What we're going to do is we're going to trim up all 3. Well, first let's trim up the lead here a bit. And we're going to trim up all 3 of the other instruments, click on them and hit Command D to duplicate each one. And then I'll click on the whole range of things, just holding Shift to select them all and duplicate them all. So let's see what our whole idea here sounds like. lastly, I was just dialing in the levels and playing with the pan settings to my own personal taste. So one of the cool things about XPand instrument patches is that they're actually 4 instruments in one. So we can actually go in here and we can customize each of the preset sounds for each of our 4 channels. So I'm going to choose a preset called Virtual Flute to replace our monophonic synth lead. So give me just a moment to do the same thing for the other 3 channels as well. All right, and lastly, let's try a new drum loop setting as well. Cool, let's try everything together. All right, so there you go. That's using 4 different MIDI tracks, using MIDI channels to control 4 different channels within the XPand 2 instrument. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you really enjoyed the video, please leave me a thumbs up and like the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. If you really want to support the channel, please make a contribution at patreon.com/MusicTechHelpGuy so I can keep bringing you guys these videos on a regular basis. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.